This is 9/11 Freefall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I'm your host, Andy Steele. The guest tonight on this Thanksgiving evening is going to be Chris Gruener. He's a psychotherapist. He's also a 9/11 truth activist operating out there in Massachusetts, coincidentally the site of the very first Thanksgiving, or so we are told. So he's going to be talking about his work in the 9/11 Truth movement over the various years, and he was also one of the guys that helped plan one of the stops taken by Richard Gage during his most recent Northeast tour, presenting the Firefighters film, so he'll mention that too. And just be talking overall about the issue that we've been championing for so many years, talking about the Boston Globe hit piece just put out too, against those who question the events of 9/11, the scientific evidence presented by architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth is not really popular in the corporate media. They seem to use their platforms to try to dissuade people from looking into it, even though when you look at the stuff that's written by some of these writers, you kind of question, or at least I do, whether they even know the story that they are defending. So this will be an interesting interview you want to hear tonight, so stay tuned. I'll be playing that for you in just a little while. So I want to go over this little bit of news really quick tonight. It appears that Lee Hamilton, he was the vice chairman of the 9/11 Commission, has gotten the Medal of Freedom Award from President Obama. The article I'm looking at is from Eagle Country 99.3 FM. It was posted on November the 25th. It begins, former longtime Southern Indiana Congressman Lee Hamilton is among the latest recipients of the Medal of Freedom, considered the country's highest civilian award. In a ceremony honoring 17 medal recipients at the White House on Tuesday, President Barack Obama praised Hamilton for his 34 years representing Indiana in Congress with honesty and integrity. This is what Obama said. From serving as vice chair of the 9/11 Commission to making Congress more effective, Lee remains a tireless public servant and a trusted advisor and friend to many, and I am proud to count myself among them. Hamilton goes on and talks about his career, but part of what it says about his career in this article, it says he was vice chairman of the 9/11 Commission, which released the definitive report on September 11th, 2001 terror attacks. So it calls it the definitive report. Now, when I Google the word definitive, this is what comes up. The first definition says, of a conclusion or agreement, done or reached decisively and with authority. So when you say definitive, it implies that this is the word, this is the law, this is the truth of what happened on 9/11. But obviously, from all the questions that have been raised by architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, by other 9/11 Truth groups, we don't have a definitive work on 9/11. We haven't gotten the truth about what happened on that terrible day. Even Lee Hamilton himself has said the debate continues. If you remember, last year, I believe this was, he was questioned on C-SPAN's Washington Journal about that. This was actually after Richard Gage had gone on the program, so I had nothing to do with this caller, but it was good that this person called Mr. Hamilton and asked him about it. So I've played this clip on the show before. I'm going to play it for you again. And as you listen to Mr. Hamilton speak, I want you to ask yourself, does it sound like he's even really admitting that we've reached the final word about what happened on 9/11? Listen.
Phil, Centerville, Massachusetts. About 5 minutes left with our guest. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning, Representative. I have two questions. The first question is, and I'm not a birther, 9/11 truther. I just want to know, did the question of Building 7, did that question come up and how it collapsed during the commission? And also, if it didn't, why not?
Building 7 was a major focus of our investigation. Building 7 was not one of the really big towers, but it was a substantial building, I think 30, 40 stories high. It collapsed. It was not hit directly by the airplanes, and there was a huge debate, still is a debate, as to why that building collapsed. We on the commission were not engineers, certainly not experts on why buildings collapse. What we did was we consulted with the engineers of the country, and they came up with their best judgment as to why that building went down. I don't remember all the details, but the basic point of it was that there was intense heat developed within the building. The sprinkler systems did not work, and such intense heat built up that the building eventually collapsed. Now, a lot of people have been looking into that since 9/11 Commission reported. They've had a lot of criticism of the Commission because they didn't think we explored it properly. We did what we could do. We consulted the experts. And of course, experts often disagree with one another. So I think that debate continues. I've heard all kinds of explanations as to why Building 7 collapsed. I don't pretend to be an expert on that. Some of the ideas put forward don't make a lot of sense to me, but then I'm no engineer and I don't know anything much about architecture. But we took the word of the best advice we could get, and they gave the reason, which we spelled out in some detail in the commission report.
Okay, now at this point, Peter Slen goes ahead and asks him, what do you have to say to those people who think that it's an inside job? Completely deflecting it away from the question of the science of the building destruction, where the question should be focused, and getting it into territory that Lee Hamilton is not going to want to go into. So let's finish the clip.
Lee Hamilton, what's your response to those folks? And by the way, we did a full segment on this program on Building 7 and some of the conspiracy theories regarding 9/11, but what's your general response to folks who think 9/11 was an inside job or pre-planned?
I just don't think there's very much evidence for it, and there's a good bit of evidence for what we found. We were charged with the responsibility of determining how this happened, Building 7 and all the rest of it. We wrote the story in a very telling chapter, the first chapter of the report, bestseller incidentally in the book sales in this country. I think that story has basically held up. There are a lot of people who don't agree with all the facts of it, but at the end of the day, you can't just theorize here. You have to bring forth hard facts. When you're investigating these complicated events, you get thousands of suggestions. Literally every morning, hundreds of emails would come in with suggestions of what should be done and what should not be done. You go through those things the best you can with a limited staff. You make judgments as best you can under the circumstances. I think we basically got it right on the evidence we had. Now, evidence may develop in years ahead that will change some part of our story. I don't think it has thus far. I think we basically got it right. You've got to get hard facts to support any idea that you have with regard to what happened on that terrible day.
So even though Richard Gage didn't go into complicity when he was on C-SPAN's Washington Journal a month before that interview with Lee Hamilton, Peter Slen sloughs it off as the conspiracy theories, because that's what Peter Slen does. Doesn't matter, though. Lee Hamilton, though, still kind of leaves the debate open there. It was actually NIST's report that was supposed to be the definitive report on what happened to the destruction of the buildings. But as we've talked about so many times on this program in the past, there's many problems with NIST's report. All right, we have photographic evidence showing that the fires on the floors in which the collapse supposedly initiated in the northeast corner of the building were out over an hour before the building went down. If you don't have raging fires, how do you have the thermal expansion to push the girder off of its seat, to have the beams push the girder off of its seat? You can't. Doesn't make any sense. All right, we have NIST leaving out important parts of the building, critical features that would have stopped their thermal expansion hypothesis from happening, and we have them, of course, keeping the input data on their models secret from the American public, so we can't even check their work. So if Lee Hamilton really wants to hold up the official story to this standard, then he needs to have a conversation with NIST. Now, he may not feel that is his problem anymore, but he can't feel that he has written the definitive work or helped to write the definitive work on what happened on 9/11. And certainly newspapers and media pundits shouldn't be citing the 9/11 Commission report as that. All the 9/11 Commission report is just a whitewashed investigation, a shield with which politicians, when asked about this issue, can deflect the question, saying the 9/11 Commission looked into that and I agree with their findings, without even knowing much about the issue. And then they can go on and talk about whatever issue they want to talk about, focus on whatever civil liberties stealing legislation they're trying to push at that moment. Right? That is what politicians do, and you saw during the C-SPAN campaign when we had folks calling into that Washington Journal program for the year and a half, how they'd even be angry that they're being asked to do their job, that they're being asked questions about this important event, the critical questions being raised by the architects and engineers for 9/11 truth. That's why we got to keep on asking them, keep on pointing out the lies and misinformation, getting our public beyond misinformation by giving them the Beyond Misinformation booklet. And of course, Thanksgiving is tonight. It's a good opportunity to talk to your friends and loved ones, show them the Beyond Misinformation booklet, go over some of the facts that are laid out in it. And maybe if you have the opportunity, get a copy over to Mr. Lee Hamilton. He can browse it while he's polishing his Medal of Freedom. All right, before I play my interview with Chris Gruener, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We'll do that beginning now. And that's 10 seconds.
The views expressed on this show by guests and the host on issues outside of the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence are the opinions of those individuals alone and do not necessarily reflect those of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Chris Gruener is the secretary for Boston 9/11 Truth and the New England AE 9/11 Truth volunteer coordinator. He helped arrange one of the stops for Richard Gage's recent Northeast tour. We'll be talking about that and other things today. Chris, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Andy, it's a pleasure to be on your show. I'm a big fan of your work. You know that. I'm very appreciative of the way you're spreading the word of 9/11 Truth nationwide.
Well, I thank you for that, but it is a major effort that is being undertaken all over the world by so many different activists, so many people out there who we need to feature more of, just those lone warriors out there in the streets spreading the information like yourself. So here we go. It's Thanksgiving night, and we got a lot to be thankful for here in 9/11 Truth. A lot of stuff is happening over the past couple of years to raise awareness of it. Before we get into all of your great work and everything, just tell our audience a little bit more about yourself and your background.
Well, as you know, I'm a psychotherapist. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist here in Newton, Massachusetts. I have a private practice that has been a pleasure and a joy to me and hopefully a help to my clients for about 25 years. Prior to that, I worked as clinical assistant to Dr. Stephen Howard, who was a psychiatrist here at Bournemouth Hospital in the Boston area. And prior to that, I worked as a family therapist with on an inpatient basis with adolescents who are having drug and alcohol abuse problems. And my work has been extremely satisfying, and it's interesting that it's actually through my psychotherapy work that I became a 9/11 Truth activist. May I tell you a little bit about how that came about?
I would love to hear that.
Thank you. Well, I had heard that some people did not believe that the events of 9/11/01 were as described by the media and our government, and I basically had scoffed at that. And it's ironic in a way that I did, because back in the 1980s, I was active on behalf of the people in El Salvador and in Nicaragua who were working for their own freedom and struggling against the oppression of our government in their affairs. And we won't get into all of that. We all know just how horrible that was for hundreds of thousands of people in Central America. And I saw how ruthless and full of lies our government and those associated with it could be. But it just never occurred to me that we would be lied to on so grand a scale or assaulted on so grand a scale that thousands of our own people, the United States citizens, would be slaughtered with the same callous disregard for life that I saw in Central America by many of the same forces. Nonetheless, be that as it may, I bought the story like so many people did, that we've been attacked by these crazily Muslim fanatics, and reluctantly, I sort of felt like, well, let's find a peaceable way forward, and I was involved in all those peace demonstrations to say let's not attack those who attacked us. I had sort of good sense in that regard, but I in a certain kind of sense understood the feelings of retaliation that people were having here in our country, because I thought we had been simply assaulted by those outside of the country who bid us ill. Well, one day, a client of mine, this is about 2004, a client of mine, someone I was quite fond of, but who I felt had a tendency to be unreasonably fearful and vulnerable to delusional thinking. She came into the office, almost burst into the office, and weeping and crying. And I said, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And she said, "I just found out that it was our own government that attacked us on 9/11." And I must admit, I had this really sort of paternalistic and condescending attitude of, this poor, disturbed client. Let me kind of calm her down and help her to get out from under these unreasonable fears. But that was the first seed that was planted for me, and it was in the back of my brain for quite some time. And so I kind of kept my eyes open. One eye open for any information about this stuff that my clients had been babbling about. And sure enough, I came across a book by this author who said, "Oh yeah, it was all aliens were behind all this." I'm talking about off-planet aliens. I thought, "Oh, so that's what the conspiracy theorists are all about." So I shrugged it off and I said, "Oh well, so much of that." And I didn't think about it again for a number of months until I had the good fortune, thank God, of coming across the new Pearl Harbor, David Gray Griffin's book, which really was such an eye-opening gift to really thousands of people who later became 9/11 truth activists. And as I read over his book, my eye, it was like a blind man suddenly getting vision. These scales fell off my eyes, and I saw the truth in front of me, and I wanted to weep myself, and then I wanted to be enraged, and then I wanted to be terrified, and then I wanted to take action. And I did. At first, I kind of had this feeling like, well, I guess it's just me and David Ray Griffin. Now, well, there's two of us who know what happened. And then one day I saw in the Boston Globe, we don't see articles like this anymore, but in the Boston Globe I saw an article about a group of truthers who were meeting over in Arlington, and they were sharing the same concerns that I had. So I contacted them. And before you knew it, there was a little group of us starting to meet on a regular basis. For a while, folks met at my house, and then eventually, for a while, we met at my church, and then eventually we settled into my office. And then even farther down the line, we became a couple of groups, not just the group here in Newton. But it was built on the realization that once we understood the truth of how we had been attacked, and began to speculate about the who and what and why, the motives of it, we had to take action. So I've been quite active ever since. Maybe it's probably about 2006, I guess, that we really started to coalesce into an active group, and now we have about 1,000 people on our mailing list, our email list. We have 2 core active groups, one in Newton that focuses exclusively on support of the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and one in Watertown that covers a broad array of topics that are all associated with the events of 9/11 Truth and some of the peripheral concerns that interface with that. So that's my story in a nutshell. I don't want to go on and on. Maybe you want to ask me some questions.
No, it's fascinating, and what you're talking about, mentioning earlier, how you had a patient mention this, and you sort of dismissed it at first, and I think this reflects a concern that's been brought up on this show. Like, what if you have somebody who's awake to this evidence? It's obviously something that contributes to people's worldview and may even hamper it, considering the implications of it. And, what do you do if you want to go talk to a therapist about it, but you don't want the therapist to think that you're having some kind of paranoid delusion when you talk about physics and common sense, like a lot of the people have been trained to do?
Exactly, precisely. Well, I must just say that I did subsequently apologize to this client. And now when we bump from time to time, we have a good laugh about it. But I think the first thing I would recommend for therapists is that we all ought to have an open mind about another person's perspective, and just have relaxed curiosity about it rather than judgment, no matter how weird or strange we might think a person's perspective is. And if we can't give that, we really shouldn't be functioning as a therapist. I made a therapeutic error when I made a judgment about my client's perspective, and I learned a very important lesson from it. So you want to seek out therapists who have already learned that lesson, who are ready to simply try to understand your perspective rather than to tell you whether it's right or wrong.
So looking at this in David Ray Griffin's book and looking at the controlled demolition evidence, what did you consider to be the strongest evidence that really convinced you?
Well, it's the controlled demolition material that won me over when any of us have seen Building 7 coming down. Once you're open to the possibility that might be other than what you were told, the fact that it's a controlled demolition is beyond obvious. So it was the nuts and bolts of the science, but also went hand in hand with that was my putting 2 and 2 together and coming up with 4 about the why of all this. Well, now just let me say, by the way, I don't think the entire U.S. government was behind this. I think rogue elements who were in positions of power, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, are obvious examples of people who were engaged with it, but many names and faces that probably none of us would recognize if we were to hear them. They had an agenda, the plan for a new American century, which I bet you've talked about in your programs previously, to dominate the Middle East, to get control of its resources, its oil and gas resources in particular, and to establish American hegemony in that region. That plan was out there and on paper well before 9/11, and we were told, or the world was told in that plan, that in order to actually see it come to fruition, there would need to be some sort of a major catalytic event. And that major catalytic event was the events of 9/11, 2001. So it all begins to come together into a comprehensive picture. Once you start to question any piece of it, it's like a big puzzle, and the parts of the puzzle begin to come together into a more elaborate whole.
So 2006, in my view, is that magic year when a lot of the activists who we still have operating now woke up and started doing something about it, and obviously I can add you to that list. So since 2006, what kind of activities have you been doing with your various groups that you've been affiliated with to raise awareness of the 9/11 truth issue?
Well, we've done everything from working at the individual level, flyering windshields, handing out 9/11 truth materials at intersections, blogging. We do highway blogging, so we have a number of big banners that bring into question the events of 9/11, and we have 4 of them that go in a row. So at 4 different bridges on Interstate 90, the highway here, we hold up these banners, and then so people will get 4 different messages about 9/11. The fundamental one being that 9/11 truth will bring an end. The exposure of 9/11 truth will bring an end to these endless wars of aggression. And when people come off the highway, come up the off ramp, after having seen the last blogging sign, someone is there to give them a piece of literature, hold up the literature. Someone is holding a sign that says question 9/11, and someone is holding literature that then gets handed in the window. And so we make contact with people who might not normally come to our public programs in that kind of way. And we also put on public programs. We've showed just about all of the architects and engineers for 9/11 truth videos. We, on occasion, have held these film showings in local theaters, and on occasions we've held them in local libraries. So more recently, we also, I think I mentioned it in my a little bit earlier, emphasis on supporting the work of architects and engineers for 9/11 truth, who I consider the tip of the spear, and Richard Gage is my Nelson Mandela, I'll tell you, who really is putting himself out there and promoting a quality of encouragement and connection among 9/11. So worthy of our emotional applause and our practical financial support. And if any of your listeners here are not regular monthly donors to Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, after you're done with the program today, please go to their website. You'll see a link there where you can donate either on a one-time basis or on an ongoing monthly basis. And realize that this is the organization that has put us within reach of actually promoting a fundamental shift of consciousness here in the United States. So that's my Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth commercial. But our work here in Newton, and the work that's out of my office at this point, as I say, has become primarily in support of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And what we're doing is building a nationwide network, so that we're divided into 8 different regions throughout the U.S. The region that I'm responsible for is New England, and that interfaces with the New Jersey, New York region. Les Jameson is coordinating that, who you may also know is, I'm sure you've had him or are going to have him on your program to talk about the 28 pages, the redacted 28 pages of congressional testimony that has some very fascinating material related to 9/11. So our group here in New England interfaces with the New York, New Jersey region, and then together we interface with the entire United States of America with its 8 different regions, and we meet on a twice-a-month basis for phone conversations with one another to talk about evolving a nationwide strategy. I'm responsible for the New England states, and by the way, we still need a representative from Connecticut and one from Rhode Island, and we may be having someone going to join us from Vermont, so that position could be taken already. But if you're from Connecticut or Rhode Island, and for that matter, if you're from Vermont, you really want the job, which is a lot of hard work and no pay. then contact me, please.
That's like the Peace Corps, the toughest job you'll ever love.
Exactly right.
And I know there's a big 9/11 Truth Presence in Connecticut, so you should be able to find somebody, I'm sure. But no, this is how all the stuff that needs to be done, and you're dropping ideas to our audience, simple things done well every day that our audience can do to get the word out. And so that's what the show is all about. You just had Richard come to your town recently during the Northeast Tour. The Northeast Tour went over really great, by the way, folks. So please tell our audience about that. What gave you the idea to get involved with that, and how'd you go about planning that event?
So just I want to tag on to something you said a moment ago about individual activism and opportunities for that. A simple thing that every single person who hears your show can do is go to the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth website, ae911truth.org, go to the section, the store, and find the literature that interests you, that you'd like to hand out to other people, and for a very small amount of money, you can get a very large number of flyers or brochures, and you can give them to people you know, friends and neighbors and family, or if you're a little bit more shy, you can put them on windshields. You can hand them to people at stoplights. There's any one of a number of ways. You can leave them in coffee shops for people to just come across randomly. There's any one of a number of ways that either in a gregarious and playful way with other people, or if you really want to just be a little more private and shy about it, there are any one of a number of ways in which anybody who's hearing my voice right now can take action for support of 9/11 Truth. But on to I think you were asking about the Architects Boston Expo, the ABX Expo that we were recently involved in supporting Richard Gage to come and be a presenter at. Am I correct?
Well, I was asking about the Northeast Tour stop with the firefighters film, but I want to hear about all of this.
The Northeast Tour actually grew out of the idea that Henry McLean, one of the folks in our organization, he and a couple of other fellow licensed architects who are members of the AIA, as Richard is, knew that the Architects Boston Expo was going to be held just this past week here in Boston. They knew about this maybe, 6-8 months ago, and they said, wouldn't it be a great idea to get Richard Gage to come and present? And so that idea was floated and voted on. We all agreed what a fantastic idea that would be. Richard agreed to come. We had to do some fundraising on our end, and Architects and Engineers had to put down a serious amount of money to participate in the expo, but it was definitely worth it. There were over 1,000 people that were spoken to directly by either Richard or by the many volunteers from our Boston area group here that came to help out at the expo to hand out literature, to talk about Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, answer questions. It says over 1,000 people were engaged in that way. 90% of them were licensed architects. 110 professional architects, licensed architects, signed the Architects and Engineers petition requesting a new investigation. That petition currently, if you go to the website, you'll see it stands at about a little over 2,300. But I'm aware that there are already actually several hundred other architects that have to go through a bit of a vetting process before they can be listed. We have to confirm that their credentials are authentic, so that everyone actually gets on as a signer of the petition has been vetted to make sure that they are in fact licensed architects in good or engineers in good standing or building professionals. There was 110 additional petition signers that now are pushing us close to 3,000. And we think we're going to have 3,000 in the not too distant future, professional licensed signers of the petition requesting a new investigation. Probably the most valuable outcome of it was that we have 49 new co-signers of the American Institute of Architects resolution asking our government for a new and authentic and unbiased investigation, and that's our goal, or one of our central goals is to get that level of support from the professional association. You were asking then about sort of the rest of what evolved out of that, which is the New England tour. Once Richard had agreed to come in and present the story of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth at the Boston Architects Exposition, it made perfect sense. We all realized, well, gee, let's have him come in and do a program locally, which he did here in Boston. He presented the new film Firefighters, Architects, and Engineers Expose 9/11 Myths, and that program occurred here in Boston. But then, as long as we're going to have the expo at the Boston Exposition and then a public program here in Boston, why not have a whole tour of New England? And so that idea evolved and was smashing success. I can't off the top of my head tell you exactly how many stops, but I want to say 7 or 8, beginning in New Jersey and going through all the New England states. So, yeah, very happy with the outcome of this tour. It's really energized the entire movement throughout New England.
So how hard is it to set something like that up if somebody wants to do this in their own local area, to find a venue? What are some of the things that people need to take into consideration when they're trying to plan something like this?
Okay, well, the first thing is to get a team together. None of us here in Boston could have organized the events that have taken place this past week without being part of a team. And it's not a one-person operation. There are lots of things that one person can do individually, but the first thing a person wants to do individually is find an ally, and then find another one, and find 2 or 3 more, and get a group that's meeting on a once a week or a couple of times a month basis, and make it social, make it fun. Have a potluck dinner, or order pizza, or make it a time of hanging out and encouragement, as well as nuts and bolts political planning. But form a support group is what I'm saying is the most important element, and make it an enjoyable experience of people who will become friends over time. That's what will sustain activism, over the weeks, months, years, however many more that we have to go until we win this thing. So form a group. But once you have a group, then ask yourself, how can we spread the message? Okay, I've talked a little bit about the ways in which individuals can, hand out literature, but you can then talk to your minister or a rabbi or a priest about the possibility of having a program at your church, or your synagogue or your place of worship. You can talk to the people in the civic organization that you belong to. Henry McLean belongs to a group of people that are focused on, green energy. The fellow who I was telling you about in our group who got the ball rolling with the ABX presentation. And so he's reaching out to people in his sustainability group. So just think about people with whom you may have common ground. Climate activists. Well, I realize that the whole question of what's happening to our climate is controversial in and of itself, but you can bet on it that the people who are involved in the climate movement, like people who are involved in the 9/11 Truth movement, are dealing with people who have strong opinions in opposition to them. Okay, so find people who are your natural allies and groups that could be your natural allies, and think about how you can interface and work together. And then put on public programs. A library is a great place to think about a public program because you can generally get it for next to nothing. If you want to represent architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, if you're living anywhere in this area, in New England, you can speak with me about that. And please, can I give out my phone number? Is that okay, Andy?
Sure.
It's 617-965-6552. I'd be happy to hear from anybody, particularly in the New England area. who would like to get involved with 9/11 Truth activism. Again, my number is 617-965-6552. That's my office number, but please just leave a message and I will get back to you. If you're outside of the New England area, you could also call me and I could put you in touch with the organizer in your particular region. So form a group, find a way to put on programs, and then also think about reaching out to professional associations and organizations where that we might find natural allies. For example, scientists for 9/11 Truth. You can go to their website and you can begin to link up with, if you happen to be in the science arena, with allies who are scientists. If you're a firefighter or someone in your group wants to reach out to firefighters, these are our natural allies. That's why we made a film with them. There were many firemen murdered on 9/11 and first responders that were murdered, who have every reason, along with every other patriotic American, to get to the bottom of what occurred. So reach out to firefighters. Send them a copy of the new video that I was mentioning a moment ago. I don't know. Did that answer your question, Andy?
No, this is all great advice for anybody that wants to make something like this happen. And did you alert the press in any way when you were doing this?
We did. I'll be frank with you. Getting press coverage is not all that easy. Certainly, getting favorable press coverage is a bit of a struggle at times. But I'm a believer that any press coverage is good coverage. You know the old saying that first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, and then you win. So if we are ridiculed in the press, it's press coverage. Many of your listeners probably know that Alex Beam wrote a rather hostile editorial over his interview with Richard Gage, but as far as I was concerned, that's great. It got the word out there that we exist, that we've got a message. It made people curious.
What is your take on that article? I mean, just analyzing it and your own view and how it came out.
I've got it in front of me. Maybe I'll read an excerpt or two if I may. Mr. Beam refers to the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth as architect truthers, kind of a dig right there, a tiny vocal subset of the profession. I don't think that nearly 3,000 licensed architects and engineers is tiny. We definitely are vocal, that's for sure. And then he wants to kind of trash Ed Asner, who he calls an early 9/11 truther who has suggested that investors profited from 9/11. And it's very interesting the way he framed that as suggested that investors profited from 9/11. It is clearly well documented that huge put options were in place on 9/11 that were planning for the crash of American Airlines and United Airlines stock, and that millions of dollars were made by investors who had foreknowledge of the 9/11 attacks. So to say that he's a truther who suggested that investors profited from 9/11 just sort of underlines that snide and unfactual way in which Mr. Beam speaks. So then he goes on to speak about Lynn Margulis, with the same sort of Professor Lynn Margulis, late professor at the University of Massachusetts, who appears in one of the architects and engineers from 9/11 Truth videos. And he puts her down as, because her field is evolutionary biology, what could she possibly know about the subject? Well, we could just as easily say, well, what does Alex Beam know about the subject? He's a journalist. But I've got in front of me here. I'm not going to do the whole thing, but if you want to take a look at Dr. Margolis's resume, I'll just read off a few of them. Elected Fellow of American Association for the Advancement of Science in 1975, elected to the National Academy of Sciences 1983, guest Hagee Lecture, University of Waterloo 1985, 1992 recipient of Chancellor's Medal for Distinguished Faculty of the University of Massachusetts Amherst, 1995 elected Fellow of the World Academy of Arts and Sciences, on and on and on. I got about 20 references here to the awards and honors she's had. Most recently, before her death, 2010 inductee into the Leonardo da Vinci Society of Thinking at the University of Advancing Technology in Tempe, Arizona. 2010 NASA Public Service Award for Astrobiology, honorary doctorate in 15 universities. So, to just sort of snug her as well. What does she know? She's just an evolutionary biologist. It's just typical of the way in which Mr. Beam tends to discount the movement.
Well, what do you think is the motivation? Well, it's tough to speculate on motivations, but what do you think the psychology behind putting something like that out is? Because, I had a friend once say if 200 doctors told you that Jiffy Pop will kill you if you eat it, that would certainly take enough to be enough to make people look into it, be enough to justify some favorable news coverage or at least impartial news coverage of that. And that's a fantastic scenario, of course, but that just kind of drives home the point. So what do you think they're playing on there in our society that can just so easily dismiss all of these experts?
Well, that's an excellent question. And again, let me just go back to the innuendo that was used in trashing Mr. Gage. Just read a quick paragraph, if I can, from Mr. Beam's editorial. Gage won't say who he thinks sabotaged the Trade Center buildings, but his adherents are not so shy. At an event he organized in 2012, one 9/11 truther said, "I had to be dragged kicking and screaming into believing that our government and the Israeli government, the Israeli Mossad, could be responsible for the Twin Towers demolition." Another attendee reported, "At least 3 firefighters in New York at Ground Zero who came upon a large store of gold at the Twin Towers were executed by the FBI." These are really bizarre kind of quotes for Mr. Beam to put in an article about Mr. Gage. But what they do is they take fringe theories and fringe accusations in the 9/11 truth movement and act as if it were the core of the matter. I think those of us who have really gotten clarity about how to get to the depths of what occurred on 9/11 are not saying to anyone, this is what happened. We know what happened. What we're saying is, you know what? The story we got about what happened doesn't hold up. It doesn't stand to reason or to science. So we need a new, unbiased, well-funded, authentic investigation into what brought down the towers. And then when we're clear about what brought the towers down, and we think that there's unambiguous evidence that they were brought down by pre-planted explosives, that when we get as far as agreeing together that the towers could not have fallen the way they did, that they must have been rigged for demolition, then it will be clear to all of us that somebody more than just the 19 alleged hijackers must have been involved. And if we can get as far as realizing that the attack on this country had to have support from the inside our country, then we can perhaps begin to explore who the perpetrators were, who the planners were, who the executors were. I think that people like Mr. Beam seem to be worried that where all this is going to go is as an attack upon America's traditional allies. Now, it's not for me to say who was or wasn't behind the events of 9/11. That's not the point of our conversation today. Eventually, we'll find out what domestic and what foreign terrorists were actually involved. But that terror that he has, that somehow Israel will be dragged into this, and that he has to sort of defend them before they're even attacked, so to speak. I think says something about the psychology of the situation. But more comprehensive than that, more than Mr. Beam and his theories, is that if you think about, all of us Americans, we think of our government in a certain kind of way, almost as being like parents, right? They're supposed to take care of us. They're supposed to protect us. They're supposed to make sure that our needs are met. And just like I have found again and again in my psychotherapy practice, that it's a terrifying, frightening, excruciatingly painful process for someone to admit to themselves that their parents or the others who were supposed to protect them may have assaulted them in some sort of insidious way, sometimes so powerfully that they can't even remember it until well into therapy. Just like it's a very painful and frightening process to acknowledge that those who are to protect us, our parents, actually have injured us in some terrible, painful way. In a similar way, I think it's frightening, terrifying for Americans to say, perhaps elements of our own government were involved in injuring us, in assaulting us, in killing many of us. That's a terrifying confrontation to make. And so when we go anywhere near that psychologically, the first line of defense is denial. Couldn't possibly be true. On to other subjects. Nothing to see there. Move along, please.
Well, there's a lot going on right now in terms of world events, and on the day that this show is being recorded, Turkey shot down the Russian jet. And so everybody's attention's focused on this. A couple of weeks ago, we had the Paris attacks. And so all of these new events that are coming up, stealing public's attention away from what happened in the past, what happened 14 years ago. And I get asked a lot, why are you still on 9/11 when that was so long ago? So just in your view, how important do you think 9/11 is in the context of recent world events? Why do we need to keep focusing on this?
I'm so glad you asked that question. It comes up again and again in our conversations with people here as well. 9/11/01 is the soft underbelly of the beast that is devouring our world at this point. American aggression and Western aggression is running rampant. And it has been for as long as I've been alive. We go back to the Kennedy realizing that things had gone terribly wrong in Vietnam, and the next thing we know, he's been assassinated. The process of American intrusion into the affairs of other countries never goes well. Show me one country where it went well. It's not going well in the Middle East. But the soft underbelly of that whole process is 9/11. It was on the attacks of 9/11 that became the justification for the militarization of our domestic domain here, of our country at home, and for the militarization of our relationship to the Middle East. We didn't have these hundreds of thousands, perhaps, of Muslim communities who are angry, and many of whom were potentially drawn into being jihadis. We didn't have that hatred towards America until America went into the Middle East and killed over 1 million Iraqis, destroyed their economy, and at home cut off so many of our cherished civil liberties. None of this happened until 9/11. So if we can uncover the true perpetrators and the true nature of the events of 9/11/01, then we have some possibility of undoing the sick and distressed relationship we've established with the Middle East.
I mean, 9/11 still affects our world. It's not something that happened 100 years ago. Every time that they want to steal more civil liberties, every time they want to attack another country, they do it in the name of preventing another 9/11. So, I mean, it's still as relevant today as it ever was. So here again, this show's airing on Thanksgiving night, and do you have any final thoughts for our listeners? Anything you want to leave them with as they move forward into the new year with this issue?
I would say let's take a look briefly at history. We did not come to terms with who really and how and why President Kennedy was murdered. We did not investigate adequately the murder of his brother, nor the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King, nor the murder of Malcolm X, or the presumed murder, as far as I'm concerned, of Senator Wellstone. We just let all these things go by, and then next thing we know, not only do we have the events of 9/11, but we have these endless wars of aggression. One thing leads from another, and this won't just stop with the current campaign against ISIS. There'll always be a next reason to militarize. There'll always be another enemy out there until we uncover the truth about those who have sabotaged. Truly sabotaged our cherished freedoms and the good-hearted intentions of most Americans. So let's be thankful on Thanksgiving Day that there is a 9/11 truth movement, that there are thousands, literally thousands, of people throughout the United States and actually millions worldwide. I think people have no idea of the strength of the 9/11 truth movement worldwide. It's far stronger outside of the United States than it is within. But even here in the United States, we have thousands of activists, and I'm confident we actually have well over a third of the country that no longer believes the 9/11-01 myth. And we're looking for what they call the 100th monkey. That individual who tips the scales, that one more person who shifts the consciousness so that we no longer can deny the truth of what happened on 9/11. People are no longer able to say that the world is flat. Okay? There got to be a point when we had to acknowledge that the world is round. In a similar kind of way, there'll come a day, there'll come a moment when there are enough people who are awakened to 9/11 truth, when it won't be possible to deny it anymore. And when that 100th monkey is found and is activated, there'll be a foundational tectonic shift in our country, and an entire new era for humanity is going to emerge. And we can all be thankful for that. That's the vision we have for the future. That's where we're headed.
Chris Gruener, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Free Fall.
Thank you for inviting me, Andy. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
This program's on every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download MP3s of this show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week. Good luck.